April's demands to repay his debts. He escaped by taking out a $400 million loan from Worldcom. Eber's troubles mounted from there as other WorldCom executives began hiding declining profits by cooking the books. The telecom industry had overbuilt, revenues were falling, and supply exceeded demand. WorldCom used a variety of tricky accounts methods to boost its 2001 to 2002 profits by $3.8 billion. Arthur Andersen, the company's external auditing firm, missed the deception. WorldCom's internal auditing department finally discovered the deceit. WorldCom stock nosedived with the news. The company, worth around $150 billion in 2000, was valued at only $150 million in 2002. So from $150 billion to $150 million. Investors, including employees who had purchased company stock for their retirement plans, were wiped out. Accountants eventually estimated that WorldCom had inflated its assets by $11 billion over the previous few years. It was the largest accounting fraud to that point in American history. Bernie Ebbers resigned as CEO in 2002, the same year that WorldCom filed for bankruptcy. Roughly 17,000 employees lost their jobs. In 2005, a judge sentenced Ebbers to 25 years in prison for fraud and corruption. Other WorldCom executives also received prison time. WorldCom emerged from bankruptcy under a new name, MCI, which became part of Verizon in 2005. WorldCom was one episode of a large wave of corporate malfeasance. Enron, a Houston-based energy company, and another Arthur Andersen client filed for bankruptcy in 2001 after a massive accounting fraud of its own. Adelphia Communications and Tyco International soon joined this hall of shame. Americans' faith in Wall Street and corporate leadership tumbled. How could it possibly get worse, they asked. So this picture here is former WorldCom CEO Bernard Ebbers as he endures a stressful moment during a July 8, 2002 hearing before the House of Financial Services Committee. Ebbers refused to testify, citing the Fifth Amendment. And then here in this picture, I might have to move the camera a little bit. In this picture, let's see, it says the newly unemployed Enron employees ponder their futures in front of the company's Houston headquarters on December 3rd, 2001. So this one is Enron, and the other one was Ebbers. So what's interesting about this, I had researched some of the .com, the big scandals that had happened during that time a little while ago, so it's not completely fresh in my mind, but there were a few points that stuck out as far as like interesting concepts. And if you guys have watched any of my other videos, I sometimes look at some of the conspiracy angles in terms of a lot of these major news stories, and that sometimes there are these, I guess, behind the scenes black operations that are happening, and on the surface they're presented as these major news stories. There's still scandals and big soap operas and things that are happening for the public, but behind the scenes, what is a common is that money disappears in almost all of these situations. So there's like a huge scandal that is breaking in the news, and then quietly a large amount of money just vanishes, and nobody knows, what happened to it. Basically, the story goes that, okay, well, the books were cooked, they were borrowing money, and that was the same story in this case, where they said this person, Ebers, didn't have any real money. He was borrowing all of the money to buy the stocks, and then when they were paying it back, they were paying back by loans that they had taken, and so there was no real money, and so basically all of the accountants were faking the profits, and money was borrowed to pay back investors, and that's what they were doing. They were cooking the books. But money was given by investors, a lot of money, billions of dollars went missing in this Worldcom case, as well as a couple of other companies. Just huge amounts of money went missing. And the conspiracy theory behind it is always look at the event that happened right after the money disappeared. So if we look at the timing here, this dot-com boom basically happened in the early 2000s, but the bust happened in 2002, so it had already it was out in the open by 2002. I guess the lawsuits and everything, and it was reported publicly by 2002. So the thing is, the money was already gone before that. So the major event that we all remember from between 2000 and 2002 was 9/11. So billions of dollars went missing, and then a huge operation happened during 9/11. And so the conspiracy theory is that part of this disappearance of the dot-com money, as well as Enron and a couple of other companies that had gone bankrupt right in this previous period, because they went bankrupt after the event, but the money went missing before the event. So they were saying that these were actually sham businesses that were, basically trying to garner money for black operations. Again, nothing can ever be proven. These are just theories that people talk about, but I do remember reading this and thinking that's very interesting, because the amount of money by which these stocks were overvalued was in the billions. This is really a huge amount of money. 150 billion was the value, but then it was underrated by 150 million. So that's several zeros. That it was overpriced, and so people were paying based on the overvalued worth, the fake worth, and huge amounts of money just disappeared because that was never recovered. And this was the biggest. I guess this was the biggest fraud of that kind in U.S. history. It's I guess kind of forgotten at this point, because it's been maybe around 15 years, so people aren't aware of how much money went missing. And then because such a major thing had happened in the country in 2001, by the time this was going on, although it was upsetting and people who were directly affected were upset, it was almost like in a line, a string of events that were occurring one after another, and so there was like an exhaustion point as far as the media was concerned, because the Iraq War started, and all of the issues that went along with that. The new presidency was on, and various the media was focused on that and the decisions that the administration was making and so forth. So some of these things, although Enron and Worldcom were big stories, there was just so many things that were happening in the early 2000s that it was hard to keep track of where the money was going. So I think that's kind of interesting, though. Anytime there are these huge money scandals, you have to look back by a year or two, meaning at the time before it was a scandal, before the information was released publicly. That's when the money disappeared. So what happened a year or two prior to the story being released? Was there a major event? Was there a major operation that took place, meaning something that required So it's just something to think about. And that was the shady world of Worldcom. That's what this little section is called.